So much to everyone for joining. My name is Frances Davies and I'm from the Knowledge Hub for Organic Agriculture in Southern Africa. I'm based in Zambia, and a very warm welcome to you to our last in this series of webinars that we've been running over the course of the last 5 weeks, really looking at the practicalities of agroecology and organic farming for smallholder farmers in our region, but also in Africa. So the KHSA program is part of a continent-wide initiative called the KHSA, which is the Knowledge Center for Organic Agriculture in Africa. This is a GIZ supported project, but there really is growing partnership. It's way beyond this project itself. So we connect with networks and partner organizations across the continent. And of course, through webinars such as these, with many people from our region, and I believe many people from Africa as well. We've had a lot of participation in these webinars from West Africa, East Africa, and of course our own countries. So thank you very much. We've gone through the whole series of webinars looking at sustainable seed systems, which we started with, building soil fertility, and then we looked at managing pests and diseases. We also then looked at appropriate technologies for smallholder farmers. There's a lot of hype around technologies nowadays, particularly with the increase in corporate capture of our food systems and agriculture. So what really are appropriate technologies for smallholders? And today we are talking about converting to agroecology. So really, what do smallholder farmers need to consider? Some of the costs and the different systems, practices that need to be put in place in order to get off pesticides, to get off the chemical industrial farming practices and shift to agroecology and organic production systems. So this is really wonderful that we can have this finale to this current series, and I'm very, very happy to have two amazing speakers with us here today. Both are from South Africa, but both work in the region and have links to projects and to other farmers in Southern Africa. So firstly, we have Gavin Oslin, who is a very experienced farmer himself, and he's also a professional. He supports farmers across the region, actually in advising on practices and sustainable farming systems of how to exactly get off pesticides and transition to more sustainable farming techniques, both at small scale as well as larger scale. So this question of scaling up agroecology is really, really critical. It's something that we're challenged with all the time. And Gavin works with farmers at various sizes, advising on exactly these kinds of things. What are some of the ways that how we can get off pesticides and adopt and slowly implement practices in order to make that transition? And our second speaker is Busi, who many of us know. She's a very, very active PGS, Participatory Guarantee System champion, or a pollinator, as they were called in South Africa. And Busi is an organic farmer herself, an agroecological farmer, and has been all her life. And I believe her whole family were traditional agroecological farmers. She farms organic vegetables, herbs, and indigenous plants with her husband in the Eastern Cape. And she produces for sale into the local market and also provides training to help support conversion to more sustainable farming models to other farmers in her area and actually across South Africa. So we're really, really happy to have these two presenters here with us today that offer a very diverse and range of experience working with commercial farmers and also working with smallholder farmers, commercial farmers, but really what are the experiences on the ground from Busi, who has a lot of experience. So thank you so much. We're really excited for this final presentations. And I'm going to start with Gavin today, and then we're going to have a Q&A session, and then we're going to move to Busi, and then have a discussion as well after Busi's presentation. So thank you all for joining us. And Gavin, I would welcome you now. Unfortunately, Gavin's camera is not working, but welcome and thank you so much, Gavin. You're welcome to share your screen. There we go, we can see it, thanks. Wonderful. If you want to go ahead, Gavin.
Yes, thank you so much, Francis, and thank you to all the participants. Please be patient. We're going to flip through a couple of these slides. There's quite a few. And then obviously afterwards we'll enjoy any Q&A. So just a quick a bit about my business. Started this 25 years ago as a drive to trying to help farmers. I've over the years educated myself thoroughly in all aspects around soil science, microbiology, irrigation, everything that we can try and regulate or manage as humans in this whole process of growing. Our company is based down in the Western Cape. We're a group. We have a technology division, crop systems. We have an agronomy division where we work directly with growers and networks across Southern Africa. We have various types of entities that specialize in making biological or organo-mineral fertilizers. We make biopesticides. We also produce probiotics, one of the largest producers of EM in the country. And this group is obviously made up of a whole group of people. So just to give you a background, it's not just myself, although I started the business. We have, over the years, like I think in your community, founded like-minded individuals that really want to work together to help overcome the issues out there. So just to give you a background, we have a whole lot of different types of individuals, software operations managers running in the background. We've got a huge agronomy team. This team operates all over SADC. We travel quite aggressively amongst all of the SADC countries, not all of them at the moment. We'd like to get to most of them. And then also obviously from your international. So as you can see, qualified individuals that have at least had a good 10, 15 plus years experience. And then we've also collaboration with various research institutes across various sectors. We also interact with the likes of the Permaculture Institute, with biodynamics, with the organic sector, etc., learning from them and seeing in what way we can interact and help. Again, a plethora of researchers that we use externally to verify observations. So what we've qualified ourselves in doing is understanding that there's a change brought about through our practices. We want to qualify and quantify that. So we've invested a lot of time. We've invested a lot of time in the last couple of years in this section. So sorry, my screen is just frozen a bit. So we operate all over SADC. So all those blue dots represent where we have people of our own on the ground managing areas and working with agents or networks directly with growers or government. And globally, we have distributors with some of our technology all over the world. So currently, just to look at why we do what we do, if you take what the Earth looks like currently, this habitable area is the small bit of green land and the forest areas that us as humans occupy. And 10,000 years ago, it looked pretty nice. There was 42% grassland, 57% forests, and a small amount of fresh water. And in between all of that was us human beings. And then slowly but surely, some crops were starting to be developed 5,000 years ago. We looked at Mesopotamia, the Euphrates, parts of Asia, those areas that were being developed. And slowly, some grassland disappeared. The 1700s came on, it got bigger and bigger. The 1900s, we started to see a big jump in that it's really the beginning of what we call, say, the large-scale agriculture started to begin between the 1700s and 900s. So this chunk of crop growing area and grazing is now infringing on this diversity that we have, this natural, beautiful diversity, this forest and grassland. And as it's infringing on that, it's obviously impacting. And at this stage, in the early scheme of things, we as humans weren't measuring much of this, and only later did we experience the problems that we have today. So if you start looking at it now, I mean, we've whittled down from 42% grassland all the way down to 14%. We've decimated huge amounts of grasslands around the world. Forestry, obviously, large amounts have been eroded. And we've got to 1.68 billion hectares of land that is now under crop production. And that 1.68 billion is causing huge headaches for everyone, because it's what's happening in there, and it's the way we've been farming with this monocropping or monoculture type of mentality. has taught us a lot. But what you have seen is the ability to obviously produce what we would think is more food per hectare. So here's the metrics to the madness. We have 1.6 billion hectares currently of production in agriculture worldwide. According to the latest FAO data, 72.4 million hectares is organically registered. So that means only 4.5% of all productive land is organic. In the 1900s, the total area, and this is where the metric becomes quite ironic, was, and this is why we can prove with numbers that scientific farming is not actually good for the environment. And when I say scientific farming, I use that in a loose term, where you're only using the benches of science and ignoring that of nature and the environment. That in the 1900s, we needed 1.89 hectares per person. In 2018, with the population where it is now, we need 4.64 hectares per person. So 95% of all production is conventional and either in another practice of sorts. So this whole debate of organic versus traditional has I think, been fired for many years, and it's created friends and enemies. And I personally am a great believer in building bridges and not walls. So it's been trying to find out more about what organic people do, and I think organic sector has been doing what they do so well. But let's find out what we do in the traditional side, and let's try and see what is this big fuss about organics? Why are we hearing so much of it? Why is there so much pressure on producers, and everyone wants to engage with organic production? Yet it only represents 5% of the global populational, growth system. So this 5%, how are we going to feed 7.9 billion people in 2022? So how can we affect Chinese food production with such heavy odds? So we have already, and how have we done that? Yeah, it's just a bit of madness about the whole thing. In 2021, the world globally produced 7 trillion tons of food. Yet it only sold worldwide 205 million tons of fertilizer. So if you look at that metric, that's a 35,000-fold increase. No fertilizer in the world is that good. So one has to realize that how is it possible for us to produce so much food if we are not able to justify that, even from a scientific basis, that fertilizer can produce so much food? And we know that all energy comes from the sun, and a large amount of it is reflected back to the atmosphere, but that is absorbed into that bottom of this pyramid. And if that pyramid is eroded, then generally your entire food production cycle is also narrowed. And obviously there's losses along the way, and this pyramid is merely an energy pyramid in an ecosystem. To understand that if the base is eroded, which is then all our photosynthetic organisms, plants, algae, and we know that the pesticides have been slowly, surely eroding that, and also practices for the last 100 years. The answer lies in that the organic fraction of the soil has produced most of that food, actually, not fertilizer. So we'll prove this again later with data on small-scale farmers in India, China, outweigh the commercial farmers by, in huge volumes, in the amount of area, and their management of their soils as such is all about the organic fraction. So a lot of nutrition is coming from this organic fraction, and it's never been recognized by conventional farmers until the last 15 years, when we were really desperate and we realized we had to look at it more openly. So a typical pyramid here of a food pyramid, you're looking in the soil. This is the soil health pyramid. The bacteria make up the base population. You have your protozoa, your nematodes, all your various organisms as they go up now. What we found is that we often hear organic farmers talking about potworms and earthworms and how they want to get worms going, but very few of them really look at the base of the pyramid. And you're only going to get the top of this pyramid if you really build a bigger and stronger base. So again, our focus of what the organic farmers have been getting right, we've taken that and said, well, what can we do to build the base of our soil? And obviously, organic farmers have been working on composting, etc., for years. And I think a lot of that started to make farmers think twice, especially on the conventional side of the spectrum, about how they treat their soil. And that was the best place for us to start, was in the soil. So you can just look at this. This is the contamination of soil with pesticide residues. 80% of the soils that are contaminated with one or more residues. So our agricultural practices have eroded completely soil to the point that it has become sterile, and it is not able to contribute that organic fraction. And therefore your dependency on pesticides and on chemicals becomes bigger and bigger. And that's one of the headaches inherited from conventional or strict farming, as we call it, or monocropping, is that you can scale, you can control, but it's not sustainable. Again, on the organic side, we've got sustainability. We can do what we can with lowering inputs, but at some point we need to get beyond that 5%. So what happened over time is, as we started to look at various learning curves from the various permaculture people, agroforestry, and eventually in the middle, sort of we've got stuck with this agroecology strategy. And if you look at it, and on the left here, we've got a farm with rows, specific ratios of fertilizers put down. There's a very much an influence in what's going on in the soil, but where we have to put inputs in, etc. And on the right side, we have a natural ecosystem. In there, we have pollinators, we have herbivores, we have natural root exudation, but we have plants that condition the microbes to the soil. It's not what we've introduced. And this is having learned from these two poles, we need to try and see what we can bring out of the ecosystem and what we can take from the agricultural practices and try and meet halfway. So one of the things we realized is all of this comes together. The biggest flux zone is in the soil. So understanding that soil is completely complex. It's a very complex physical biochemical system. You know, soil science is probably one of the few subjects that very few people try and take on because it is really complex. When you start putting plants in it and you start looking at the biology, it becomes even more complex. So we've taken our time in trying to educate ourselves about what the system does and how it interacts, especially when you increase the organic fraction. So one of the things that we've realized, and a simple thing that was discovered in 2009 by Dr. Bassler at Princeton University, was we found out how bacteria talk. So if we know how the base of this ecosystem operates and how it communicates with each other, we understand more. We don't know necessarily a lot more about it because there's a profuse amount of organisms in the soil. We start to understand how they communicate with each other. It starts to give us a little bit of a better idea why we get a reaction in one instance and why we don't, from a conventional farmer's point of view, on what the benefits the organics bring to us in enhancing our soils. So bugs talk to each other, this we know, so we need to understand this. When they talk to each other, they interact with each other, plant, soil, and other biology. We're constantly learning about this entire process here, where bacteria influence root exudates, plant nutritional uptake, degrading soils being stopped and aggrading or regenerating. All of the various types of other biological compounds that are exuded in the soil, and things that give the plant natural defense, things that we remove with hard conventional farming. We've realized why plants that are grown with more of an organic base tend to have far less diseases. We also have realized that when one starts to implement rotational methodologies like cover crops and or the crop rotation, and you look at your legumes versus non-legumes, this also starts to give us a large amount of diversity and also what we call microbial antagonism and competitiveness. So the cover cropping side of things in what we've learned in agroecology has started to give us the ability to in a structured way help us manage the issues that were really heavy to overcome, and that when in the past solved with a bottle of poison, we've slowly realized, well, we can do this and there is a financial benefit out of it, and slowly but surely we are able to expand more and more hectares and larger areas without huge financial risk. This resilience afforded to us by the cover crop is something very unique. So plant diversity connects the soil to the atmosphere. It creates bug diversity in the soil. So it's important, the more plant species, the more diversity, just the better for everyone. And then microbes also have affinities for certain root zones and plant species. So when we want to look at yield and chasing crop yield, well, then we start taking it to the next level with agroecology farmers. Looking at trying to increase yield, well, let's look at planting more legumes or more grasses or whatever the system might tell us. So We've also seen very expensive fertilizers like phosphorus. We've been able to improve huge amounts of phosphorus uptake just by adding more organics to the soil and not necessarily selling mineral fertilizer. And this has been massive saving for farmers. Currently, mineral phosphorus costs around about 130 rand a kilogram. And that's very expensive. At the moment, we have some growers that we don't have to apply any at all because we've improved this biological phosphorus pool in the soil. And also understanding the microbes. When we start to add microbial diversity to the soil, we're able to really influence crop yield, specifically in environments where we've got a strict rotational cycle because of our financial sustainability and because of the current methods and the mechanization. We have to look at what organisms can bring in immediately to give us the immediate effect. So we've invested a lot of time in understanding more about like bacillus and pseudomonas and enterobacteria and what their benefits are around crop yield. So one of the things that we've realized over the years working with these microbes and also working with farmers that are trying to boost their soil is that generally soils have a 5% beneficial and 5% harmful microbes or pathogenic microbes, and the other 90% are merely in the majority sitting in the middle. And they will lean to whichever side we can stimulate. So if we tend to have anoxic environments where there's compaction or too much water holding capacity, not that that's a problem, but maybe too much water is applied, that you end up with pathogenic qualities being induced in your soil versus probiotics, which is the inverse, where we're trying to promote a healthy oxygenated environment. So very often this science of trying to manipulate the soil in the right direction has been a numbers game, and we need to understand where we are. So modern science has allowed us to far more rapidly test what our microbial populations more or less are in the soil. And that gives us a biological strategy that we can implement to get the soil in a really, really healthy state quite quickly. So as a farming system, we start with agroecology. We start with a normal evaluation or audit like a conventional farm. We do look at the other surrounding farms. We look at the natural diversity in the area, and we obviously give that a rating. We look at the soil classification. We take a soil health measurement, and we try and develop a 1, a 3, and a 7-year strategy for the farmer. Some soils are so heavily degraded you need a longer term. Others we can turn around within a year or two. But that is important to know from the get-go. One of the things that we've realized in agroecology farming, and I take row cropping like for argument's citrus farming, is the way the blocks have been designed for big spray equipment and big harvesting equipment has allowed them to have areas where you have 20 or 30 or 50 hectares of citrus being planted in one go. And what you end up, obviously, is, as we all know, is a large area of monocropping. And in this instance, what we're doing is we say, well, with better planning and smaller design areas and learning from what the small scale farmers have been doing, we realize that we can add more resilience inside the area and not just look at what we do in the area to mitigate a problem. So we're learning a lot, and I believe going forward, things like agroforestry and even a role of a blend between agroforestry and agroecology could be a thing in the future that agricultural engineers need to look at around the design of these big food production systems. Obviously, reduction of harsh chemicals. We've identified and tested over the years which ones are the absolute no-nos. Not just the ones that are toxic to humans, but ones that erode that base. Many years, all that was done was a toxicity test for various nervous, any organism that has a nervous system. And therefore, if it was toxic in that instance, it had a toxic quality, it was listed as dangerous. There are some of those that don't harm the microbes, but they are dangerous to human beings. But very often what's happened is over the years, we've started to evaluate and realize that some of them, as like glyphosate, a classic example, is highly deleterious to the soil, although it has a low mammalian toxicity. So use of organic fertilizers, natural predators, biological mitigation. We try and complete on-farm recycling of organic waste. I'm involved in several biogas projects where we're trying to get farmers to actually use the energy factor on the farm but all of the digestate back on site without having a waste of money. When we look at scalability, one of the things that we've learned from conventional ag is scalability is decision making. We need to use technology. We need to track and see what we're doing with our water, our inputs, our labor management per hectare. Those are the things that make or break the ability to scale. Cooperative decision making is critical when you start to look at larger scale projects, because you need more manpower. As you need more manpower, you need to obviously be able to cooperate efficiently. And obviously growers need to be rewarded, specifically if you are applying more effort, that we don't just try and market this produce in the same environment as conventionally produced produce.
Just
so soil health is
5 minutes left. I know you've got a lot more to say.
I didn't hear you say, Francis, just repeat that.
If you can wrap up in 5 minutes, thanks.
100%, I will do. So I'm just going to shoot through this. One of the things to realize, agroecology was not made by by policymakers or governments. Forward-thinking scientists, small-scale farmers, environmentalists came up with this concept. We've been working on various ways to improve this, and one of the things is soil health. So the soil health assessments we do, we look at various factors in soil health assessments. We measure soil health indicators. We look at various factors to help the grower understand which area we need to work on, the physical, the chemical, or the biological aspect of it. We try and look at an ideal soil composition. And this is where we try and focus, is what starts to happen in the root zone. And from here, we digress either upwards on the plant and downwards. We take soils, and we are able to analyze soils. And from the soil health test, we're able to recommend the right type of cover crop for improving the diversity in the root zone. We've taken, like, for argument's sake, on citrus we spoke about, we've removed every 5th or 7th row and just planted a permanent cover crop. We call it strip farming, or even roadsides. Obviously reduced the herbicides. We've even brought in animal factors, very often poultry, to improve soil health. We do soil boosting. We make very specific, very specific recipes for growers to improve their soil health through proper evaluation and testing. We want to accelerate the build and breakdown of humus and build a humus fraction quickly. Soil protection, we're looking at additional adding of beneficial microbes and bacteria that help with fighting diseases and insects. We use various types of fungi and bacteria that we isolate out of the soil. And we try and create a baseline resilience. So in the natural environment, we can have a system that functions effectively. We also use modern technology. I'll just allude on this very quickly. I want to skip through the organic fraction. These are the major points to consider in agroecology. Diversity. We have to give cover crops an opportunity to be part of the system, not as a cost. Block design needs to be reconsidered, and rotations need to be considered. Resilience, it's afforded to us by conserving diversity. If we farm, if our life depends on it, then we know that profitability is a major point. None of these production systems must do any harm. We must try and be carbon positive. We have more organics and less inputs. We need to look at the cost of what the water is that we're using, because pumping is a huge cost in mainstream agriculture. Reduced inputs are obviously good for everyone, and measurement science with ethical motive is very good. I know very much on the far spectrum, people are scared of technology, but we manufacture and integrate technology in a very successful way, where I can connect people on a multiple level, advising all the way across the spectrum on food production in a safe manner. We also use decision support systems. We use artificial intelligence. We're able to predict diseases for farmers, and this helps us to reduce the dependence on chemicals and apply greener products. So we manufacture all of this equipment ourselves. We're able with software to measure the amount of water being applied. This is all part of a management tool in scaling farming. If you can't bring this to the table and you're pumping water over large areas, you can literally, through the cost of electricity, force yourself to be bankrupt. So the 5 major changes that are needed is we need to change big agricultural production. And what we've learned from our organic friends on the other side of the spectrum is it starts in the soil, it starts with quality organic matter. So farmers need to be rewarded for more than just a passive carbon buildup. Diversity in the fields and ecosystems must be preserved, so field design must change. We have to see a change in it. Complete dependency on harsh chemicals must be replaced, obviously, by softer chemistry. And food needs to be evaluated not just on its safety, but also on its nutritional density. So cover crops are essential. We need proper management of water. We need to measure and monitor with good soil health. We need to reduce the use of nitrogen fertilizers. We need to use of harsh fungicides. We find fungicides more deleterious than most other things. And obviously increase organic amendments and boosting soil biology to improve communication in soils. And that's more or less, where I can end for now, Francis. Otherwise, it'll carry on too long.
Gavin, thank you so much. There have been more questions for your presentation than I think that we've had in any other session. I think you've got a lot of detail in there, and it'll be wonderful to unpack more of it. And I'm sure each component really needs to be looked at in its own way. And I think maybe if you could just go back to that last slide, I think what's really come out is that, soil health is absolutely critical. And if we can at least start with soil health, then we're a long way into addressing it. And soil has been really something that has been forgotten over the years in industrial farming, and we're now paying the price of that. So this has been really, really interesting. Thank you. And I've never seen a picture like you presented of the pyramid. And let's look at that pyramid, and actually the bottom of that pyramid is the microorganisms, and building them is our best hope in being able to build soil fertility and transition to organics. So thank you so much for that really, really good presentation. Everyone's been asking for the presentation. We don't have as many. Some participants have raised your hands. If you could put questions in the Q&A box, please. The one thing that did come up that I think is really good to look at is the types of cover crops and the kind of cover crops that one can use in different soil types. So we have had a presentation or session already on soil fertility, but this is obviously a really, really important thing. So your work you've got experience, across Southern Africa, the huge range of soils from the Cape, which is very sandy, to our very depleted soils in Zambia. What are some of the different crops, cover crops that farmers have used the most, and it's the easiest to start using from the beginning? If you could share a little bit on that. Thanks.
Sure. So it's very regional, Francis. Regional in that what the climate allows you to implement with regards to cover crop. But the decision-making factor around the cover crop is based around first of all what your farming practices or rotations are. So if you have a permanent crop, then obviously we look at what we do in the row. So the rainfall period of the year, we choose whether it's a winter or summer type of species blend. And then the third factor would be around what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to sow this cover crop with lots of flowers to have more attraction for beetle banks or a safe haven for our predators? Or is it to eliminate alleviate soil issues? So if it's more about a soil issue, then we'll probably look at things like radishes and grasses blended in with a legume or two. Or if it's more about predators, then we'll obviously look at crops that have more flowering qualities. And then again, the diversity is important. So very often farmers might start out with a 2 or 3 species cover crop. And as they evaluate, and we continue to evaluate on a 3-year cycle, we start to realize I have multiple growers where the rhizobia population in the soil we test is 0. And the reason being is they don't have any legumes in their rotation. So as soon as you bring it in, the population starts to build up. So it's it's very much a three sort of question tick box around what the right choices are, but it varies. We have growers in the Western Cape that use oats because they have to in the winter rainfall, but for argument's sake, in the summer areas we can use teff, which grows very quickly and has a quick biomass buildup. So it does vary from area to area, and it's a very we have an expert in our midst, Morena Winnendal. She's a cover crop specialist, and she learned under Simon Hodgson. So Simon's you might very well know as a cover crop specialist in Southern Africa.
Thanks, Gavin. I think that's what's really important is the different types of context that we existed in some of your assessments in the beginning of what are the main things that we need to focus on, what are the main issues, and then being able to look at the environmental context and what fits within that. I think you had an assessment tool, did you, that you looked at that? Did you, am I right, that you had a slide that looks at that assessment?
Yes. If I go back here, if you look for argument's sake, we have so what we do over here is we have a PLFA test, and this PLFA test allows us let me just take this out the way here. So what I know it's very small, the printing on the screen here, but what you might be able to see is that can you see that? Sorry, can you see that, Francis? I don't know, it's not that clear, but it's a very small
can't really see the text,
shot. Okay, but in that text, what we've assessed for in the soil, the diversity index, the total microbial biomass, the actinomycetes, the fungal populations, the rhizobia, the saprophytic fungi. We analyze a lot of protozoa, insect populations. We analyze all of this in here, and it gives us an index on what a good and a poor and a healthy soil looks like. So for argument's sake, this specific farmer has a very high fungi to bacteria ratio. So his soil sits in a very high level of fungal diversity. However, when we look at the soil, he's running out of water extractable carbon. If you look at this analysis, the three red bars at the bottom, and that says to us that these organisms are so active that the problem is they're running out of humus fraction or organic fraction as a food source. So unless we build the soil with more cover crops and more biomass and more organic matter, these organisms won't be able to maintain this scenario for much longer. It's pretty the opposite of where farmers keep throwing compost every year, and then they don't realize that they have excessive nitrogen release after, say, 5 years of throwing it, and they want to know why their crops are always getting sick, even though they're organic. And it's just a nutritional balance. Maybe it needs some elemental potash or something like that.
Thanks, Gavin.
So this tool helps us drive that biological decision making.
Yeah, and I think in the presentations that we've had before, in the last sessions on soil fertility, we did talk about how farmers can do some of those assessments themselves. Obviously, we'd all love to go to a lab and have soil tests done. This is not affordable, and in many of our countries, we don't actually have soil testing facilities available to us. So there are some of the simple methods that we can actually then do to do some of these assessments to begin to get to have a gauge on what are the first steps that one can look at, depending on the soil type, depending on the context, what are some of the initial needs of the soil. Thank you very much for that, Gavin. So one of the some of the questions that have come up in the chat is really this cost benefit assessment. So looking at the tools, some of the inputs. So we're going to have to access more cover crop seeds. We're going to have to look at different kinds of soil management that we're doing versus, so in organic farming and in the transition phase, the costs associated with that versus the costs in conventional agriculture. So if I'm farming conventionally and continuing to farm conventionally versus some of the major cost considerations that I should need to be looking at in order to convert to organics. Are you able to share a little bit more on those?
Sure. Okay. So if I look at a conventional agricultural farmer, and I'm talking about someone that's irrigating the crop, where there's the cost of water, the cost of the irrigation, all of these inputs, in obviously maintaining good moisture in the soil so that the crop can grow at a reasonably optimal rate. You know, all of those investments are of a capital nature. But once you start looking at what physically happens in the soil, you know, the farmers there are driven by some scientific numbers. And what we've seen over the years is those scientific numbers have always overcompensated. And I'll give an example now. I have a Zimbabwean farmer who wants to grow potatoes, and his soil is of such a nature that he has to over-fertilize potash because of his typical soil structure. So having to get him to go greener, I've got to get him to work on his organic fraction. I've got to improve his soil health. So everything tends to sort of gravitate back to the soil health and the soil structure. And one of the first things that we do is identify where the major Achilles heels are, and we address those first. And essentially, if they're in the soil, that's where we need to work on. We might not get that farmer in year 1 or year 2 to change a lot of his other conventional practices, but if we start to try and change the organic structure of the soil, and the structure of the soil by working on the organics and its physical nature, because nothing can survive. I always take the comparison. If I put plastic over your head, a bag, and I ask you to run 100 meters or 300 meters or a kilometer, you're not going to survive if you can't exchange air. And if the soil is closed and sealed and it doesn't exchange air, it can't take water in and it won't suck in air afterwards. So the reality is we have to start working on the soil first. And we wouldn't necessarily get the farmer to wean immediately any nitrogen for that year. What we'll do is after 1 or 2 years of that, then we'll test again and say, okay, you've built your soil up beautifully. We can take 50% of your nitrogen away or 40%. And that's why I say some farms have got a 1 year, a 3 year, and a 7 year strategy. Those farmers that have been with us for 10 years now, their fertilizer bill is half of maybe what their neighbors are. And they have a higher quality produce being pulled off with less inputs. So there isn't very much an initial phase where you probably run sideways, but certainly after that, you're in a progressive regenerative state because your soil is building itself, and that starts to reward you. I go back to my pyramid. 205 million tons of fertilizer can't produce 7 trillion tons of food. It's about the organic fraction and what the biology does for you. It's unequal.
Mm, mm. Maybe you can go back.
So that cost, that cost, I can go back to that cost that we look at is very, it's very dependent. If I just want to get the right picture. This one. Is it this one, Francis?
Yeah.
So if we look at this picture here, this base needs to be built up, and this is our first port of call when we're trying to get a farmer to remold. I can't get him to change his genetic variety he's planting, but what I do tell him is that you have to stop spraying Roundup. You have to stop using the following 5 bad boys. Let's get rid of them, because that's what's really killing your soil as well as the way you farm. And slowly but surely we take them across. And very often we find growers with 1,000 hectares of maize that give us 100 hectares. And after 1 year, they see, but they yielded the same maize with less inputs or more affordable inputs. And then slowly but surely they expand. And that's how we've slowly but surely been able to turn the ship around. We can proudly say we have some citrus growers and table grape farmers. Apart from 2 chemical applications a year, the rest of their farm could almost be organic. And they're farming 500 hectares of export table grapes. But we've brought cover crops in, we've done a whole lot of things differently. And that's been a long journey, but certainly it is possible. The benefit of the system is that they already have systems in place. The scalability, there's certain things that row cropping affords you around, like I call it the Ford Motor Company production line. Trying to get large volumes of produce out of a block where things aren't in rows is a problem. So those are some of the things that we've accepted are not going to change. But what we have learned over time now is those things must change if we want to change pesticide management, or if we want to change fungal control. We need some diversity within the block.
Mm. So just we need to wrap this one up. It's been really interesting though. I think there's three main questions that I just want to speak to, and then you can answer them in general. And then there are some more questions in the Q&A that afterwards perhaps you could just go to, and you can maybe type some answers as well. But Gavin, do you know about the use of azolla and the water from azolla ponds in improving soil fertility and health? And then the other thing is just this relationship between good soil and preventing insects and pests. So I think just to go back to the basics very briefly, just about soil health and pest resistance in plants and the relationship between those. And lastly, one more question is really just about access to some of these inputs, particularly of cover crops, the seeds for legume crops and other cover crops. Obviously, South Africa might be different, but how farmers, where are those finding those? And I think then Busi might be able to speak to the smallholder example of that. But if you could just wrap up those three, thank you.
Okay, so azolla is actually a very good sign on any water body. It's a sign of very healthy ecosystem. So if one's talking about taking that and obviously putting it back into the soil, I would see absolutely nothing wrong with that. It would be most of those plant species that do drift on water tend to have quite a good calcium level, duckweeds, things like that. So I've had experience with it causing issues, but when it's obviously harvested and composted, it makes a very nice quality organic mulch to work into the soil. So my experience with it so far has been positive, but if it's in a water environment, obviously it causes issues around obviously irrigation dams, etc. on the azolla. It's not something that we see every day, but certainly it's definitely worth looking at, you know, from bringing it to the soil. Sorry, Francis, the other question was the?
So I think maybe if you can just speak to access to inputs, particularly seed and cover crops.
Okay, yes.
Legume crops, nitrogen fixing.
Okay, so 100%. So we have a whole bank of them. We operate throughout Southern Africa. So I have a representative in Zimbabwe called Sandy Roberts. She's a cover crop specialist as well, and she heads up our agronomy there. In Zambia, we work with one or two other fertilizer companies there, but Dave Simon Hodgson works a lot with Wiz Bignell and the likes of that have great knowledge on obviously cover cropping, but AGT do distribute into those areas. But I mean, if anything, anyone's welcome to contact me afterwards, and I can put you in contact with the right people in each given geographic zone to try and see how we can assist. But seed is very much something that's available at times of the year, and then when there's a crunch period, then some seed is not available. So very often I think it's around proper planning and looking at what you need long in advance to make sure that you know that you can get it. And there, my colleague Morena she's got all kinds of spreadsheets that can assist and help you calculating how many seeds per hectare, etc. that we need.
Gavin, thank you so much.
It's not very expensive. Cover cropping is, you know, when we sit with big conventional growers and we tell them it's 700, 800 rand a hectare, I know for a small scale organic farmer that might be very costly. But for them, when they see that with a benefit it affords them later, it's money well spent.
Thank you. And I think that is really the importance of this kind of collaboration as we're looking at what large scale farmers can do and their real move to organics and using some of these and building up the market for different cover crops. And then also like looking at these for smallholder farmers. And so we started with the really important conversation about seed banks and seed saving. And this is really, really critical. So how do we get more?
I'm going to be talking now. You can finish if you have.
If we can, get seed access to smallholder farmers and get them into community seed banks, and really how we can plan this. over a longer course of time. So thank you so much, Gavin. We'll come back to you at the end after Busi's presentation as well for further questions.
I'm looking forward to it.
And if you could just
Thank you.
attend to any more questions in the Q&A, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Can I stop sharing?
You can stop sharing your screen. Thank you so much. And I'm going to move to Busi. Are you with us, Busi? And you can unmute. Thank you so much. Busi, I think your video was working earlier, so hopefully that still is. I think Busi has load shedding. Thank you, Busi. Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. And I introduced you before, but you can also share some more, and I'm going to share your screen. Your presentation now, if I may. That one. Can you see all right?
Yes, thank you, Francis.
Great.
Greetings, everyone. And I would like to thank the organizers of this webinar for this opportunity. Also to thank the attendees that are here. Without them, we would not be having this webinar. That is so wonderful. Thank you, Kevin, for the insights and the very informative presentation that you've just made. And I will start by saying agroecology is not a new thing. And you will see from my brief description of where I'm coming from. And as introduced, my name is Busisiwe Mkangela, an agroecology farmer in the Eastern Cape. And I'm a seed saver. Yeah, then you can put in my slide, Francis. Yeah, as my background shows, I grew up in a farming family where my grandparents farmed grains, beans, melons, and pumpkins. And they used traditional methods when they were planting these, using old fermented crol manure. And they used to prepare the land using cattle. And it was also so common that after harvest in winter, then they would let the cattle graze on the fields freely, which we called ukubhuqisa in isiXhosa. That is my traditional language. And then there would be also ugelesha, which is a practice to prepare land for winter crops, so that then they allow the first rains, the first summer rains, to soak in the field. And then because they were like doing a dry land farming, so that then they are able to sustain the crops during the seasons that there was no rain. My maternal grandmother would wake us early morning to manually water her diversity of vegetables. We had all the vegetables. We never knew that you could go to a shop and buy spinach, cabbage, carrots, because they were readily available at my home. And like many other people, I just took agriculture, and I hated agriculture, and because then I saw it as being labor intensive. It was cruel. We would wake up early in winter and go and water those crops. Yeah, because I thought it was hard work, but I could see that then, because my grandparents never worked, they put my parents and their siblings through schools and university through farming, because then they sold their crops. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. Then I graduated from University of South Africa as a nurse educator, majored in nursing education and nursing administration. There in the healthcare systems, we believe in primary prevention being better than cure. And we were promoting healthy diets and nutrition, because we know that all the chronic diseases start with a faulty diets, and then diets that don't have a nutrition. And then in 2014, I became an agroecology farmer. I was trained by TCOE, which is Trust for Community Outreach and Education. And because then I was involved in the school nutrition program, where I had a tender with Department of Education. I was feeding 15,000 pupils a day in 15 schools. So then finally, when I had been trained in agroecology, I could see and reason with what my grandparents parents and how they were farming, because they focused on building the soil and they never used synthetic fertilizers. They were using that old fermented compost from the krolls, because then they had cattle, they had sheep, and they were able to get the compost, I mean the kroll manure, so that then it could be composted and be used to build that soil. As Gavin has stated, that it starts with the soil. Next slide, please, Francis. All right, then working with agroecological principles. After I was trained in agroecology, I was exposed to a lot of agroecology farmers through farmer-to-farmer visits, which I see as very much valuable, because then they increase your knowledge. After you've been trained, you can go and see what the other farmers are doing, how this thing is done. So those networks helped me with many rural farmers, emerging and smallholder farmers who already were producing food using agroecology principles and practices. And this helped in the myths that are saying that agroecology is for backyard gardens. We went to farms that are like 6 hectares, 10 hectares, farms in Newcastle, like a farm that is there that is 10 hectares, but practicing agroecology sustainable. So the principles include intercropping for biodiversity. When you intercrop, it means you've got a lot of crops that go together, and that is called also companion planting, where you are looking at plants that are going to be beneficial to each other. There's crop rotation, where you look at classes of crops, where you cannot plant a certain crop after you have planted this one. Like for instance, if you've planted a cabbage, you cannot say you are crop rotating when you're planting a broccoli, because they are in the same class. Then mulching and composting. Mulching, it's the term that we use when Gavin told us about ground covers, and so that is mulching. Whether you will be using your dry grass, whether you will be using your cover crops that he was talking about. And most commonly, answering your question, Francis, when you said which cover crops, usually in the Eastern Cape, more especially those that are doing grains, they use pumpkins as cover crops and sweet potatoes as cover crops, or cowpeas as cover crops. So those are also the ways that you would be mulching. And if then you end of the day. So another principle is rainwater harvesting and conservation for food. Agroecology and permaculture are almost one thing, and we know that there's a principle of saying stop and then slow and sink, meaning that rainwater harvesting is very good for you to be able to sustain your crops. And yeah, next slide, Princess Francis. Sorry. Okay, then since we are talking today about conversion to agroecology from conventional farming, how do we do this? It is a conscious decision to farm using agroecological principles, meaning that the farmer has to take that decision, and it requires a change of mindset. You'll find that outside there's a lot of fear that is being instilled in people to say that with organic farming, you won't go far. If you are doing organic, then you have to have an elongated period or season. And scientifically and biologically, if then you have to plant a certain cultivar of cabbage, and it takes 3 months for that cabbage, why should it take 5 months or 4 months when you are planting it using organic or agroecology principles? So that change of mindset, the fear is the thing that is holding people not to do it. So your first one will be your change of mindset. It begins with you. And then the second step is a change in how land is worked. As we've seen, we cannot overemphasize this, that you start with the soil, build that soil, feed that soil. That soil has to have minerals, microorganisms, amino acids, the protozoa, the bacteria that Kevin was talking about. because the more fertile the soil, the healthier the plants, and the more resistant to pests and diseases. Think of yourself, if your body is healthy, you are immune to diseases. If you are eating healthy, you won't be running to the doctor every now and then. So that's the way the plants should be. The soil should be the one feeding the plants and not you feeding the plant. Feed, build that soil, use organic matter, use ground covers, and then incorporate agroecological practices, that is building biodiversity. When you build biodiversity, you use your ground covers, you use your intercropping, you use your companion plants. Biodiversity means a mixed farming. In your farm, there should be livelihood. Animals, you should incorporate everything in your farm. There should be a balance between the ecology and the ecosystem in your farm. You building that biodiversity, that is how you convert. Then using ground covers, as has been mentioned, crop rotation, intercropping, and also water management processes. Your water management processes, again, this is not a new thing. It has been practiced. If you look in the rural areas, when it is going to rain, children will be asked to collect drums and put them so that then they can collect that water that is free from the rain. That is so good. And you know that with your soil, it is the best conserving of water, because then if you build your plots and you make your plots to be like able to take that water, when it rains, you have to go outside as a farmer. You look at how the water is coming, so that then you are able to collect that water. Don't let it run out of, take those runoffs into your farm. And then, so this is the water management process that we are talking about. And the seed production. Kevin has spoken about this, seed production, you're saving and you're storing. And because then if you save your seed and you store your seed, it is going to be able to put your profits further, because then you're not going to be buying seeds every year, year in and year out, because you are able to have your own. You should start with your family and have your family seed banks, and enlarge and go to the community. Then from the community, you can have your regional seed banks, national seed banks, and voila, we can have the seed banks in the continent, where we'll be having our seeds, resilient seeds, so that we are able to have that healthy crop that is going to be improving our health. And also talking about a true cost accounting. If you think of now the chronic diseases that are like now hammering our health systems, the hospitals, they don't have like money now to continue, because there's a lot of chronic illnesses. But then if we eat healthy food, it means that people going to the hospitals, that will be reduced, and then the government can be able to save the money and do other things that are very much important. Francis, yes. Again, the third one is for the farmer to become an active scientist. Remember, we said it first starts with you as a farmer. Then secondly, now that you've decided to do that with that mindset that you've changed, then thirdly, you have to become an active scientist, understanding natural relationships. The natural relationships that I talked about, the ecosystems, the balance in the ecosystems, the animals, your wildlife, your water, your crops, your indigenous crops, your fruits and trees and indigenous trees. So that natural relationship, we coexist with the world out there. We coexist with our environment. We don't live in isolation. So we bring all that together as we convert from conventional farming to organic farming. And then observing weather patterns and changes in climate. This has long been practiced by our parents. They would look at the moon and see if it is full moon. Then when you plant after that, then your crops will just succeed and you will have a bumper harvest. Then understanding broader ecological cycles. What do we mean by that? with your ecological cycles, the crop rotation that we're talking about, your during the winter times when you have to like plant the ground covers, that will be helping you with these green manures or green fertilizers or green composting that you will have to have. And encourage others. That is agroecology is not just for backyard gardens. It's just not for small scale farmers. It can be scaled and it is economically viable. We must just beat the myths that with organic farming, you cannot be profitable. You can be profitable. And you know what? If it says organic farming cannot feed the world, who said we want to feed the world? If we feed our families, we feed our neighbors, we feed our community, we feed our regions, and voila, at the end of the day, the world will be fed. And I think that is what I would say in conversion to agroecology. Thank you so much, Francis.
Vusi, thank you so much. You are always incredibly, incredibly inspiring. Thank you. So these are very, very beautiful pictures that we've had here. And I need to just stop sharing your presentation, unfortunately, so that I can see some questions. I think that was absolutely just, it just said, you said so much. Really, it starts with ourselves, the mindset change. And then I think you said something so key that is often forgotten. What has really also come out in these webinars is get yourself connected. So I think this is really important, is the most amazing, the best learning that we can have is cross-learning and exchange from farmer to farmer learning, so that we can share practical examples of what's happening in our communities. So we're not feeding the world out there, we're feeding ourselves and we're feeding our communities. So let's start there. And what are the experiences that we've had from each other that we can teach each other? And really, I think for many of there's a lot of lead farmers, there's a lot of NGOs, multipliers, champions on these webinars. And I think it's so important, how can we look to support other smallholder farmers? How can we look to get farmers connected? And I think that that's something that's really often forgotten, is how can we build really strong networks so that we can really support this this learning between farmers. Thank you so much, Vusi. So we've got a lot of questions still from the last presentation, from Gavin's presentations. Vusi, I think what was really, really amazing about you were an agroecological farmer right from the beginning, but you've worked with a lot of other smallholder farmers, both backyard farmers who used to use chemicals and who now are moving off and into organics. Maybe you can share some of your stories about how long has it taken other farmers who you've worked with to be able to get off pesticides entirely and to be able to move to organic farming. Can you share a little bit of those experiences?
Yeah, to tell you the honest truth, Francis, you find that mostly in the province that I am, a lot of the vegetable that is consumed is cabbage. And it is the most problematic crop with pests and diseases. And this is what mostly our people are consuming. And you'll find that most farmers want to plant that. And I would sometimes joke and say, that cabbage is not our indigenous crop. So stuff it, if I can just say that. Leave it and look at other crops that are indigenous. Then if it's giving you problems, until you have your soil built, then you can start planting cabbage. And with my situation in the Eastern Cape, most of the rural farmers in the communities, they grew up like me. So they grew from their families planting naturally using compost. So what has happened is that most especially with women, we've just said, even if you've got a greater area where you are planting using conventional farming for profit, purposes, can you just spare your garden at home so that then you can start with organic farming and compare, see what is coming out there? For instance, you will find that there are testimonies. Somebody would say, you know that I've been looking at a cabbage and looking at the size of the cabbage from the conventional farmed one and the size of the one that is farmed organic. You'll find that this other one is small, but the weight of this one that has been farmed organic is more than this one that has been farmed conventional. And when you look at it, even the quality, it is watery, this one that is organic. So they are seeing a difference even within their crops. But you cannot take the slice of bread from them and say, totally go organic or go agroecology. Let them start little by little, but they must just be careful not to mix. They must just be far apart. That is the areas that they are, which people are calling parallel farming. Where you do your conventional, because then you've got the orders, you've got contracts that are saying we need cabbage so much a day, and then you can't abandon that. But because now you have to convert and start agroecology, you start little. And we have got a WhatsApp group that women in agriculture and rural development in the Eastern Cape are having, where I train and where they ask questions as to what is it that we can do. And I saw somebody asking here, how do we take care of pests and diseases? It goes back to your soil. Once your soil is built, once you feed your soil, you won't have those problems. But in between, as you are building your soil, there are organic inputs. Gavin has just told you that he is also having, he's selling those, and he's got companies that are having those, your effective microbes, your solutions and your organic fertilizers. They are available. You can be buying them so that they can be helping you while you are migrating and putting more organic matter into your soil.
Thank you so much. I think one of the questions from Jude. Hello, Jude. He said, your presentation is very clear and direct, and how are we going to deal with the fear of converting? And I think you've really answered this, is fear of converting is a big deal. And so start small, feed yourself at least good chemical-free food so that we can get our own families off chemicals and off the constant trips to the hospital, and then start, but keep them separate. And I couldn't agree with you more. You know, we focus on trying to convert the crops that are bred to use chemicals, rather than going also to crops that are not bred to use chemicals. Hybrid cabbages, as they're sold, as the seeds that we get nowadays, are bred they have to be grown with chemicals. So really, let's look at the different options that we don't need to use chemicals on, the indigenous seed varieties that actually there's an immediate transition that can happen there. Thank you, Busi. So a very important question, again, Busi, that I think we've looked at in the other webinars and spoken to when we were looking at soil fertility, but it always comes up, is controlling termites on our farms. And I think this is particularly key when we look at the conversion, is that in the end, if our soil is very healthy and we have a lot of mulch, then we can control termites very easily. But in that transition phase, what have you experienced with dealing with termites?
You know, that is another problem, more especially with farmers that are farming a banana, because they are so prone to termites. And it also goes back to your soil. And if you see termites, then you have to stop planting those crops for a while until your soil, you can amend it. And also, if now that is a problem for you because you really depend on those, you will have to buy the organic inputs that are going to be like helping you with dealing with that. But I think maybe Gavin would have a more physical or biological or scientific answer for that.
Yes, I can maybe come in there, Francis.
Do.
Just quickly, as a matter of interest, in China, 94% of all farms are under 0.4 hectares. In India, 87% of all farms are under 1 hectare. they produce huge amounts of organic produce, but it's not exported. It's consumed locally. So what you said in the beginning is true. Feed yourself first. The sad reality is 2% of Africa's food is produced organically on only 2% of the surface area, of which 72% is exported to Europe. So the reality is we're producing good quality produce locally, but it's being exported, and we need to just change that mind shift completely about what local is lekker, as they say in Afrikaans. You know, what is produced locally is far better, and we try and get that sold into the local community. So the food system is the problem.
Yeah.
But that's a different discussion. Getting back to the termites.
Yes.
Termites are actually a healthy sign of a healthy environment. It's not a bad thing. It's just an imbalance. So very often the reason being is just there's not enough fungal populations in the soil. Fungi need lignin. They need a residue that is persistent in the environment. They need woody substances on which the fungi grow, and these spores are natural pathogenic. The cordyceps family are very dangerous to termites, ants, etc. So if one wants to long-term mitigate it, you've got to look at a cover crop that has a very lignin or woody-based type of stem, or you need to bring in wood chips or some sort of organic matter that has a high lignin content, and as it degrades, you'll have a natural environment that fosters these fungal populations. Other than that, you can buy these fungal products. I mean, I produce one called Bugard, which is a metarhizium. We have various species, and these are fungal populations. Once they inoculate or get into a colony, will tend to keep their population numbers at a lower level, that they are of less economic importance. But termites are in the past, unfortunately, been controlled with a chemical called fipronil. Fipronil needs very small amounts a hectare. The problem is it collapses all of the ant colony as well. And with that, you normally get a slug or a snail outbreak, because the ants and the termites consume a huge amount of snail eggs in the soil. So there's always this balance that one needs to maintain, but termites are not a bad thing. Unfortunately, when they get above a certain threshold, they start to become problematic. And I go back to diversity, cover crops, what you can do long term to get your lignin content up in your soil. Lignin or woody types of organic residue is what you're after.
That's really interesting. Busi, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah,
I
think the balance between the termites and the ants, and then the snail population and the slugs and the eggs. I mean, that's really, really fascinating. I didn't know that. And then actually just being able to introduce more woody things to one's fields. I mean, Gavin, are we talking, being able to actually introduce that into the field itself, more organic matter, in between crop rows, maybe? How would one introduce that?
The perfect scenario is agroforestry, where you'd have obviously some woody residues that you could mulch in the field. But if one had to bring it in on a commercial scenario, like maybe a vegetable farmer, you would want to go and find maybe alien vegetation that you could chip. The smaller the particle size, the quicker it starts to compost. You inoculate it, you work it into your soil and or part of your compost regime, and it ends up being part of the soil environment. The quicker it can become part of the humus fraction, the sooner. If you see a tree fall over in the forest, the first thing that starts to happen is you find white fungi growing on the top, and you'll get these nice brown mushrooms that grow at the bottom. And these two families of brown and white-foot fungi have a strong role in degrading lignin, but they are the things that control the other insects and chochas in the environment. These toxic spores they give off are not good for the insects. So it's all about balance. As soon as, unfortunately, where you and me walk as humans, we disturb. So if we just know that lignin it's the reason that forests have more fungi to bacteria is because of the lignin, not because of anything else. The grassland will tend to have more bacterial populations, which for some crops is not good.
Yeah.
I like the concept that says every problem has a solution, and not all solutions are known. Because then if you see those snails, they are also a solution to a problem, because you could feed those to your chicken. So the reason things happen in there, nature, you cannot predict nature. So nature is also providing for itself. So not everything that is in your garden is a problem. So you don't have to kill everything that you see there, because it may be helping you somewhere or somehow.
Lucy, I've seen the value of poultry foraging in a hectare. You'll challenge me to find an animal that has more value to soil than hens just foraging and rotivating the soil naturally with their claws and all their manure they put down, and their eyes are so keen. They find the little insects that aren't wanted there, etc. They pick them out. And I mean, you've got now 2-3 farming systems on the same area. It's far more profitable doing that than just one crop of something. I have table grape clients that put, well, in my instance where I have citrus growers, I can't have the pigs taking the roots out. So we have to keep them out. But poultry has been a positive input there.
Yeah. Thank you, Gavin. And there's a couple more questions, Gavin, in the Q&A that maybe you can answer. Just some of the names of these organic chemicals that you are, I hate to say organic chemicals, but some of these alternatives, particularly in the conversion stage, that people can use as they are building up their soil fertility for some of these things. That was really interesting. Thank you so much. And Bosi, there is a question about, sort of wonderfully put, is there a way to co-create together, say for instance, supply of organic seed? And I think this is really important. And Bosi, I'm not sure if you were on the first presentations, the seminar that we did on seed saving, but from your own experience, I mean, this kind of seed, it's also accessing then appropriate seed. Like, we're going off chemical cabbages, but we're transitioning to other crops that actually can be grown with less chemicals. So being able to actually source some of those seeds and share those seeds within the community. Can you share a little bit on that, Bosi?
Yes, the one system that would work better for that will be PGS, participatory guarantee system, because then those farms would have been verified to have passed the rules and the principles of agro. And then now, as you start with your family first, your community, your national, and then from PGS to PGS, and then luckily maybe PGS will just grow and we'll have our intercontinental PGS groups, and where we will be able to share the seeds and things like that.
So, Bosi, I think, and we are definitely going to do some more webinar series on PGS and KHSA, where you're connected to, and so also who are here with us, the South African Organic Association, really supporting the development of PGS systems in Southern Africa and even in Zambia. They've helped us as well. And then, so these are groups of farmers who come together in order to be able to share inputs and share resources like this and go and learning. So are there any PGS groups that are already sharing seed and doing communal seed banks, community seed banks?
Yes.
There are.
Yes, we have, and we have an NGO that is helping us in the Eastern Cape a lot with that, which is Zingisa, under Trust and Community Outreach Education. So yeah, we start, they just promote that, start with your family seed bank, so that then as families, then you can be able to share to your community seed banks, and then as they enlarge, then that will be the way. But then what we like to do with that is, rather than sharing, we exchange, because you'll find that some people like to take and not put back, like what has been done conventionally, where they take nutrients out of the soil and not put back. So this system of putting back, we also use it in seed saving and storing and sharing and exchange.
Thank you so much. So we are needing to close soon, and so I would just like to just go back to Gavin, and just any final comments that you have as we end this particular session, and then I'm going to come back to you, Bosi. Are there any other final words? And Gavin, just a couple of those questions that are still there, if you wanted to answer any more of them before we close. Thank you.
I'm trying to answer as many as I can online.
That's okay.
Guys, I think my journey has been one of an interesting one. I've been at this for quite a few years as well, and mine was also because as a farmer, a conventional farmer, well educated, well trained, getting very successful yields, just realized that you know the unhealthy nature of the produce and all of these chemicals that have to be dependent on. Why couldn't I just? It was used to puzzle me. The tomato that came up on the compost heap never had any disease. And we see those wild seeds that come up there, the tomato grows, it never gets sick. But the one I plant in the row gets sick. And those are the questions you start to ask yourself. So my journey has been one of working with conventional farmers and trying to keep that scale, but bring as much of the benefits of the wisdom from the organic sector into it. And there are certain areas where obviously there's there's absolutely a lot of grey areas, but certainly the one thing is keeping systems in place, looking at farm design, and then based around that, how we integrate nature as much into the farm as possible, and then we start saying, okay, how much can I benefit out of this integrated approach? And very often it's a lot of commonality. There's a large portion of commonality, but every farm has a bespoke design. So it is really a deep introspective look at the soil qualities, the farming systems, the slope, the angle, the length on the equator. There's so many factors. But it's pole pole sana, as they say in Africa, slowly, slowly. So we're getting there slowly. But I do think that my biggest lesson has been I've learned more from farmers than I've learned from lecturers.
I think we all have. So pole pole, but transitioning to agroecology is really the only thing that we can do. So pole pole or not, we all continue. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you for sharing with us today. And Busi, there's been a lot of interest in the chat box, and I think it does show that we might need to have definitely another series on PGS. But for those people who don't know PGS, maybe you can give us a short, inspiring description of what PGS is and any other final words that you would like to say before we close. And thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Francis. PGS is participatory guarantee systems. Those are the systems that verify and look at the quality and assuring a farmer if the farmer is using the principles of ecology, which are care, health, fairness, and also care, health, ecology, and fairness. Yeah. So it's by peers, where there are farmers, there are consumers, there are retailers, they are interested parties, CBOs, NGOs, yeah, that go and verify that the farm. There's share of information, and also there is mentoring, because it is not that inspection that you would do because you want to be a policeman, but you do those visits in order to be helping each other to grow, and you have to now agree on a certain principle that you are going to follow this and conform and be a group that goes together, works together. That is just in a nutshell. And I would like to say as my closing remarks, let us save Mother Earth. They are not making her anymore. And climate change and ill health are upon us. It starts with each and every individual. It begins with you. Let us save the 7th generation. Let us think for the 7th generation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Busi. And thank you, Gavin. I think that couldn't have said any more. Really, let us save the next generation. Let's save our Mother Earth, who we depend on. And the best way to do that is shifting to agroecology. So thank you all. Thank you everyone for joining this series. It has been an amazing journey, actually looking at the sustained practical examples and moving solutions for smallholder farming to transition to agroecology. We're definitely going to be running another series. Please do go to our website, the KHSA website. The link has been put in the chat box where all the recordings will be. We're also going to produce reports from each of these webinars that will be shared with everyone in October. We'll be developing these now that the series is over, and definitely sharing more news on when the next series starts. So huge thank you to everyone for joining us over the last 5 weeks, for our wonderful speakers today. and everyone from across Africa, particularly, who's joined us. So thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.